Welcome into Rounding the Bases Live, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust. My name is Joel Goldberg, and this is, I believe, episode number 55. I might have said that yesterday. I don't remember now. It's a lot of episodes, and by design, I haven't talked a ton of baseball on this show, even though the title is Rounding the Bases. And got a new little backdrop here, so you might recognize some of these faces. I'm trying to work on the studio. This is what happens during a pandemic when you got time. But we got Salvador Perez, we got Buck O'Neill. We talked about him earlier in the week on the show. We have Yordano Ventura, the late Yordano Ventura. In the back is Alex Gordon, Willie Wilson, and Jeff Montgomery. One of these guys, maybe this one, we will see the real version of in just a moment. Boy, too much free time. Actually, really busy, though. I want to thank my friends at Enterprise Bank and Trust. Hashtag no stopping you. Really grateful of the support that they have given me to provide this show on a daily basis, to have discussions about business and leadership and everything else going on in the world, in and out of what is going on with the pandemic. Thanks to Casey Cattle Company, we had some of that Wagyu beef last night. Veteran owned and operated up in Weston, Missouri. They deliver to all 50 states. If you get on the website and perhaps you want those award-winning hot dogs or the bacon cheeseburger brats, all that good stuff, if it's not there, keep checking back because they restock all of the time. They are in high demand, and also updates, whether it be their newsletter or on social media. And I want to once again mention that it is Wine Wednesday at JJ's Wine and Spirits. If you're down in the Johnson County area in Overland Park, they are at the southwest corner of College and Antioch. They will help you pick out whatever you need. Very knowledgeable. I might have to get over there later today for that 15% off all bottles of wine on Wine Wednesday. So this podcast started really because everybody was home. I have my weekly podcast, and I decided to go daily, talking about all those different things that I mentioned. And also the reality of it was I was home and there was no baseball. I think we might be getting closer to baseball. I'm sure we're getting closer to baseball. This show will not stop, but I am looking forward to getting back to work with a guy that I believe I have spent more time with over the last 10 years than any person other than my wife. And outside of this year, we spend more time with each other than we do our families during the summer, at least. So that might change a little bit. There we go. I'm here. See, I'm trying to learn all these roles that that you and I have never had to do. It's going okay. The real live Jeff Montgomery, Royals Hall of Fame pitcher, joins us, and we might sneak a baseball question or two in if you're watching live via Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and you want to submit questions. We can do that. The reason why I wanted to have Monty on was to talk about all the labor stuff going on in baseball right now, because I don't know too many former players that know as much about this topic as Jeff Montgomery. Monty, first and foremost, I'll ask the question for everyone else. I know the answer already because we were over for a get-together last weekend at your place, but how are you doing?
Well, so far so good. I mean, it's unfortunate to be spending this time of year with doing things around the house and not being at the ballpark on a fairly normal basis. So obviously, like a lot of baseball fans, missing the game itself. I'm like you. I feel like there's a pretty decent chance that in the near term there will be some baseball, and you and I can start doing some broadcasts for pre and post game for the Royals. And I think everybody's looking forward to that. I know it would certainly be a nice break in the action for a lot of people who have not been able to get out to the ballpark, or the people who have not been able to watch baseball games, all the things that everybody's missing during this unfortunate pandemic that we're experiencing. But pretty much business as usual, other than the fact that we're not going out to the ballpark.
Yeah, well, I mean, just to give people a little peek behind the curtain, when I am out of work like this, I just do other shows and create things, and that puts me in my comfort zone. When Monty is out of baseball work, he just builds things. So I break stuff. Monty builds closets and installs bathtubs and all that kind of stuff. Right? I mean, whoever knew that you were? I guess I did. Whoever knew that you were a Tim the Toolman? Wasn't that the guy's name on the Home Improvement?
Yeah, I think that was him. I got a lot of that from my mother. My mother was very
Mm.
creative and did a lot of things around the house. I learned a lot from her, but I've learned more from YouTube than anything. So just watching how-to videos, it's amazing what you can learn how to do. Things that I didn't even think were possible for somebody to do without picking up the phone and dialing to get the local expert out to your house. But I've learned a lot, and I've been really enjoyed doing it. It's keeping me very busy.
Yeah, I know that. I saw some of the work. Very, very impressive. I meant to do a couple things before we came in, and I just ran out of time. One was I wanted to grab your book, which is sitting on my shelf or by my nightstand somewhere, because I wanted to read a passage that essentially said in the back of it that working with me all these years, you're always early and I'm always late, which was true. So sure enough, I tell all my guests to be in here 10 minutes before, and I knew when I got in at 11:53 that you would already be there, so you were. So I'm glad that some things never change. Uh,
Well, as
and
a baseball player, that's in your blood. I mean, it's
I know.
if you're early, you're never late.
Right. It's I would say the two groups that are never late or rarely late for an interview are athletes, at least for yeah, some of the current players may sometimes be a little bit late because they got stuff going on and there's priorities, right? But they show up. But certainly guys that like you, it's like this is it's like being late to a meeting or stretch in baseball. You don't you're used to getting fined. And in the military, I mean, it's like there's no negotiation there. So I always try when I have a military guest on to be a minute early, and they're still already there. So that was the one thing. And the other thing was I wanted to queue up this video, and I can't find it. And I know I have it somewhere. And if I just been a little better prepared, I would have had it. Maybe in the course of this interview, I'll have it. But it's about a 7-second clip of you and I laughing hysterically.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
don't know that I would actually give the story that goes with it, other than the fact that it involves Rex Hudler, a dog, and uncontrollable laughing. And I really was gonna bring it up because why am I doing this? Don't do this. But because actually that was a dumb idea, because whenever we see it, we start uncontrollably laughing. So I brought that up because it's a reminder of how much fun we have and how good it's going to be to get back to work. But we're
Oh,
not
no
back
doubt.
yet. I don't think it's going to be July 4th now, but I don't think it'll be much later. So let's set the scene here. And if anybody has questions, please submit them, because I think that while Monty's not in these meetings from that standpoint, the times have passed you by. You're not a player in this, so to speak. However, with 9 years of being the union rep, you know what these meetings, forget about a pandemic, you know what labor meetings and disputes are about. It's business. It's not pretty. I think the difference right now, let's start here and then we'll set the table. The difference now versus when you were dealing with, the strike and all the labor stuff over the years, there was no social media back then. So you could leak some stuff and it might be in the morning paper, but it could fly at any minute of the day. And to me, that's made things more contentious.
Yeah, and if going back to those days and being the team's player rep and in the good times and the bad times, I mean, being the player rep essentially was being a person who had the ability to uh, communicate and provide information to players. And like you mentioned, no social media, no email. In fact, everything was done via teleconference back then. So organizing phone calls with your entire 40-man roster during the off season, leading up to collective bargaining or during a strike or a lockout, whatever it might be, it was very challenging just logistically in order to make that happen. But something that's was essential, and it's similar today, where you have a lot of players who have varying opinions on what's right and what's wrong. Everybody wants to play baseball. Certain guys have the opinion that, like right now, one of the big issues is getting paid 100% of their pro rata salary. In other words, if they played half season, they would want to get 100% of that contract that they have. The owners obviously are trying to get the players to take a haircut on their salary, their compensation, based on the fact they're going to lose a lot more money without fans in the stands, at least when the season starts. If it starts early to mid-July, there's no way there are going to be people in the stands. And baseball generates roughly 40% of its revenues. from day of game. In other words, ticket sales, parking, concessions, all those ingredients go into roughly 40% of owners' revenue. Without any of that, everyone understands, especially the owners, that there's going to be a tremendous, red mark at the bottom line at the end of the day. So they're trying to work through all those issues, and I just go back to the days when I was our teams player rep. We had players who said, "Hey, we need to get back to work. These are little things we're holding out for. These are not enough to be on strike for." And then you go to these meetings, and our union leader then was Don Fear. He had an assistant, Gene Orza, and Michael Weiner, former Player Association director who passed away in the last few years. He was part of that team. And it was amazing going into these meetings how there were so many different opinions on what's right, what are we willing to stay out for, what do we really need to get back to work. And when you go to these meetings, those three guys, the Don Fears, the Gene Orzes, the Michael Wieners, these guys would get everybody right back in line, understanding exactly what it was going to take for it to be a good deal for all the players. And you can't just try to satisfy the top echelon players or the players without any or very little service time. You have to do something that's right for everyone. And I think with this negotiation, another thing that's probably at stake as much as anything is collective bargaining will commence at the end of the 2021 season. So the collective bargaining agreement is going to expire. I think the union now is saying, look, if we cave now, it's going to be somewhat of a precursor going into collective bargaining next time around. And if we cave now, there's certainly a good chance that owners are going to feel like we will cave big time in this next round of collective bargaining. So there are just so many variables involved in all these discussions, and not being privy to them and not having a chance to talk to players the way that we normally would in a regular baseball season, feel a little bit in the dark about what really is it going to take.
Yeah, and so much of it is what's just being reported, which the guys that are reporting on this, the men and women that are reporting on this, they've got sources. I mean, they're not making stuff up just for the sake of it. But I would also say that they can only report on what they're being given, and so there is a game from both sides of leaking this or saying that, and so that's sometimes what we get. We're getting a piece of it. So to me, I just try to sift through it, kind of figure out what makes sense and what doesn't. Like the whole Arizona thing about sequestering everyone and playing every team in Arizona, that was a legitimate idea. It just never made sense to me. And so you see the overreaction because we're all craving news, and so something comes out there from a great source, like a USA Today or an ESPN or whatever it is, and then suddenly it's blowing up on CNN and other places, and it's like, well, let's pump the brakes here. But I think we're, if this has been a game of chicken and a long play game at a time where we don't have time to play the long game, I think we're getting close to the end. In part because it's sort of put up or shut up time. I mean, it backs against the wall. So let's back up a little bit and dissect this. And put it in layman's terms. You have an ability of understanding this at a higher level than most. I think it's the way your mind is wired to begin with, and then having been in the room, so to speak, before. Back in March, if I understand it correctly, late March, baseball and the union came up with an agreement for a return to play, and the hang-up that basically gave the players a prorated salary, right? So like you said before, you play 80 games, or let's call it 81 games, which is half the season, you're going to get 50% of your pay, on and on. Then they decided and realized that fans might not be able to come into the stands. As you mentioned before, Monty, no tickets, no concessions, no parking. Suddenly, the owners are losing massive amounts of revenue that they thought that they were getting. So they come back and say, you know what? We're going to come back, but we want you to take, say, 75% of that prorated salary. And the players say, wait a minute, we never agreed to that. For starting point here, and then we'll dig deeper. That's kind of the basis of this whole argument, right?
Right. I think if the owners were to say, we're going to pay you 100% of your pro rata number of your salary, for a reasonable number of games. Let's call it 75 to 80 baseball games. I think the players would be on the next plane to spring training 2.0. And I think that's really the biggest obstacle right now. It seems like the players are very unified on that point. I also feel like the owners probably are very unified on the fact that they really have to consider what type of an investment are we willing to make financially to ensure that there's baseball. And some of the consideration in my mind is, what do the owners need to have happen in order for baseball to not lose more footing or ground with regards to its fan base and its advertisers, its sponsors? Everybody's out there who's been highly supportive of baseball. And let's face it, baseball's losing a lot of share with regards to, especially the younger population as far as popularity. So I just think the owners have to consider, how much are we willing to take that gamble? And everybody knows where everybody is. And let's face it, two things make deals happen: a deal that works for both sides, and when there's a timeline, when there's some type of a deadline that's there. I think the deadline is rapidly approaching. It's not like you have, I think March 26th was going to be opening day this year. It's not like we have an opening day scheduled. However, there is a realistic time frame that if you're going to play baseball, you have to start. And that's why I think you have to find a deal that works for both parties. And you have to realize, what is our deadline? When will something from a timeline standpoint create some activity? And we're starting to see more and more activity. It seemed like we went for 4 or 5 weeks with hardly any news on any negotiation. Now, finally, we're hearing proposals. We're seeing where letters are being exchanged. We're seeing information being produced now. We're hearing reports of the negotiations taking place. So as a result of that, I feel like both parties understand maybe it's an artificial deadline, but at least we have a deadline now that we're working around.
And I think the response that gets everyone every time that gets pushed out in the media, or just reported, I should say, is, so for instance, yesterday the players offered 89 games. I mean, they were at one point saying 114. League came back and said 50. Now the players come back and say 89, and the reports were there's no way that owners will accept that, in the same way that players came back and said there's no way we'll accept this. So I think that the reaction oftentimes is, oh, they're screwed, oh, it's not going to happen. But to me, it's like, it's interesting that the amount of games owners want, which way am I going here? Owners want here and players want here, and it keeps kind of coming back to where they thought it was going to be. Isn't that negotiating? I mean, as this stuff is happening, this is happening because they're potentially offering something else, or it might be a little thing. Hey, we'll do this for you. We'll do that for you. We won't do this, right? So if the players are willing to say, look, we don't have to be at 114 games, and the owners are saying, well, we don't have to be at 50 games, but the players are saying, but we have to have our 100% pro rata, then we'll move off of other things, including the games. Isn't that kind of what's going on?
Yeah, and it's just like, there has to be some ground in the middle. Obviously, neither party wants to give up any more ground than what they realistically have to give up, but there has to be some give. There has to be some take. And I think the players feel like their give was when they agreed to a pro rata salary back in March, whenever they had when spring training was put on hold. They went back and said, hey, let's be realistic here. If we only play half season, we're getting paid half our money. And I think the players feel like that's exactly where they are. I don't think anyone truly believed how big of an issue this pandemic was going to be, what the fallout economically worldwide was going to be like. And I think once everyone now has realized that, and that's when I think the owners, who most of them are very astute business people. Obviously, they're billionaires for a reason. Most of them didn't inherit $1 billion. So they've worked hard, and they're very bright. They're very intelligent, and they understand negotiation. They understand the bottom line. They understand what it takes. And I think now that they understand better, the impact economically on the game, they're going to the players saying, look, you guys got to help us out here. And the players have helped out by going with the pro rata salary, but I think it's going to take a little more than that. And obviously, the players at this stage anyway have been very adamant about not giving up that full pro rata portion of the compensation. But there are so many other little things that can help bridge that gap. And I would love to see, some dialogue between the players and the owners that would allow it to be something that the baseball fans can really understand and wrap their arms around and say this works. This really makes a lot of sense, because right now I don't think there's a lot of faith. There's not a lot of confidence from the fan base that the players or the owners are trying really diligently to try to to get something done.
The one thing that I have said over and over again, certainly on the baseball show I do with Victor Rojas, the Big Fly Baseball Show, is no one has ever, before a pandemic, during a pandemic, this will be true after a pandemic, no fan has ever had an appetite to watch millionaires fight with billionaires. I think that may be the difference in the past, and I'm curious what your recollections of this are. When you guys lost so much of your season, that was tough for fans to understand, which I'm guessing you guys were okay with. You had to do what you needed to do, not just for yourself currently, but for the future generation of players as those before you did. That's part of being in a union, in a very strong union. Fans don't really care. They just want to see the game. And what happens typically is it's a lot easier for us as fans to blame the players, because we go to the ballpark every night and we know who Alex Gordon is. We know, who Salvador Perez is. We don't know the owners. We don't root for the owners. I'm speaking for fans here. The way we do the players. The players are the heroes. They're the ones that win and lose the games, and so that's what we see. It's just harder to relate to the owner. But I do sense at this point, with the pandemic and everything going on, that I don't know. I don't sense as much backlash towards the players. I just sense frustration, period, that they can't get the game going.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a whole lot more frustration just overall with baseball. And you look at the other sports who now have essentially lined things up to go back to work and start playing games and doing all the things that their fan base wants to see. And I think, going back to my day, particularly during the strike of 94, 95, I felt like a human lightning rod. Honestly, as a player rep, it seemed like everything that came down, it was coming my way. And it was really difficult. And you're right. There's a lot. I think then it was, we were on strike. When you're voluntarily not playing a game, you're going to be blamed more so than the owners. This one, it seems to me like there's maybe less blame on the players, because people understand that, hey, they've agreed to give up a pro rata portion of their compensation in order to try to make this thing work. So I think there's probably less bitterness toward players this time around than I can remember during past work stoppages. And this obviously is a work stoppage for totally different reasons, but it's still a work stoppage, and people don't like it. They want their baseball. They want their sports. They want normalcy. They want to get their lives, and they want to sit down, in front of their TV set at 6:30 in the evening and watch you and I do a pregame show. And then they want to watch 7 o'clock. They want to watch the Royals play the Angels, and they want to watch a postgame. They want to be back to normal. And without baseball, that doesn't happen.
Well, I could see it in some of the comments coming in. Janet says on Facebook, I'm missing baseball games. Love my Kansas City Royals. My friend Kiana says, miss baseball. She also mentioned about Buck looking good back there. I would agree. Buck sitting front and center when I can get him into the shot. And Jack Baker says, missing you guys at the K. We'll be back soon. Certainly hope so, and looking forward to that. Look, we all want to be back too. I mean, certainly it's livelihood for many of us, but beyond that, we just we love baseball. We all love baseball. That's why we do this, and so we hope that that's the case. I think we're getting there. It's going to look different. I don't think there'll be fans to start. Maybe there'll be some fans later. I think we'd be happy if there were 10,000 fans. Whatever it is, I think we'll just be happy to get back to baseball. Here's a topic in terms of negotiations and collective bargaining that comes up over and over again. Every other league, I think, has a salary cap. If there is a line to be drawn in the sand, even more so than the pro rata, it's that salary cap. Owners, hey, we'll share our revenue with you. Players generally say, we don't even know what your books look like. You won't open them. Why is that, and has that always been such a differentiator in terms of negotiations for baseball?
I just think there's always been some level of distrust when one of the parties is unwilling to open the books and discuss financial terms with something other than just their trust, other than just what they're saying. And it's just one thing that baseball's been exempt from that uh, requirement, I guess, to open their books. One of the few industries in our economic society that does not have to open its books. And I think once you get down to really serious negotiating, that always comes up, and there's always an unwillingness on behalf of the owners to show the real numbers. And I've read a few articles recently where some owners have come out and said, we really don't make a lot of money from baseball, but then you see where they keep playing games and they keep having seasons. So if you don't make much money, and some claim they lose money every year, and it's not a hobby. It's not something where guys have made tons of money and they're willing to go out and just put on a game for the fans, at their own expense. So it's always created some discussion with regards to trust, with regards to owners versus players when it comes down to negotiations. And I don't know that it's ever going to change. The generations before me, my generation of players and today's players, they're in a free market system where they're allowed to get paid what their employer is willing to pay them. And that's what the work stoppages up to this point have always been about. It's just maintaining that free market ability for players to earn what they're worth. Back in, again, my generation of players, there was always roughly a 50-50 split in revenues between the revenues of the game and compensation of players. That has actually shifted in favor of the owners somewhat significantly over the last decade or so. So I think the players they've lost some grounds, have lost some traction. Obviously, everybody's doing quite well. Minimum salaries are, almost $600,000 a year now. Average salaries way up there. But I think the players have given up a lot, and I just think this is one reason why you're seeing them being so strong now on this 100% pro rata salary.
I saw an interesting note or tweet last night from Derek Gould, who is the beat writer in St. Louis for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. I've known him forever from back in my days working there, and knew him when he covered hockey and then baseball. And I think he's one of those guys. He was past president of the Baseball Writers Association of America, which is a very strong group, very powerful group too in the game. And Derek was the one that wrote an article a couple of weeks, maybe last week, when the players proposed 114 and the league came back at 50. He pointed out that the difference from the original 82 game proposal was 32 games on each side. So you could see how they're both sort of going in equal opposite directions. Well, he pointed out last night on the latest proposal of 89, if we're talking about geographic divisions in play, and I think that's what we're going to have from a safety standpoint, which means for all you baseball fans out there, you're looking at your normal division, and then every game you play out of the division is probably going to be against the opposite league in your region. So the Royals, I don't think the Royals will play the Angels or the Mariners or the Yankees or the Red Sox this year. It's going to be the Cardinals, the Brewers, the Cubs, the Pirates, and the Reds, which to me is really intriguing. That's actually in some ways more intriguing than interleague because of the geographic rivalry, and they're trying to keep people safe and minimize travel, so that makes sense. But here's what he said of that 89. If you play 11 games in your division, okay, so the Royals will play 11 games against the Tigers, the Indians, the White Sox, and the Twins. That's 44, right? And
Yep.
then that leaves you with 45 games left. Well, if you play 9 games versus each non-league division opponent, okay, so that means those National League teams I mentioned, the Cardinals, Reds, Pirates, Cubs, and Brewers, there's 45. You end up with that number 89. So I when he pointed that out, I just wonder how they don't just randomly pick 89 out of a hat. We're being told 89, but I just wonder how much discussion goes into that.
Well, I'm sure those are very calculated numbers, based on scheduling, based on economics, all the things that they would have to, really put a lot of thought into uh, with regards to making everything work. I think, given where we are with regards to understanding this is going to be a different year, it doesn't matter what happens between now and time the last pitch, if any are ever thrown this season, it's going to be an unusual year. For one reason, I believe that they should try some things that are different. Maybe some good things will come from this. Maybe it will be somewhat of an impetus for some change in baseball. You have to do whatever the fans want. And if the fans really like something like playing more games outside of your league, and I've heard a lot of people talk about, gosh, I especially teams that are in like uh, the Twins territory, for example, they don't like the fact that the Twins, who now they have their chests out, that they're one of the better teams in baseball. They don't like playing the Tigers. They don't like playing the Royals. They don't like playing the White Sox. They don't like playing the teams who have not been contenders for some time as many games as they have to play. And they want to play more games against teams that they consider more contending type teams. So this may be something that can lead to something very positive, but you have to try it. Whether it be the designated hitter, shifting up your schedule, doing more things that people want to see as far as your fan base is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be disappointed, and it will be disappointing. But this year, who cares? Like, just let's get back to playing. But I'll miss going places. Well, we may not travel. I don't think we'll travel at all. But I miss seeing the Angels and the Mariners and the Yankees and all those teams. It's fun. I would say that we all see too much of the teams in our division to begin with. There's no reason to play a team 19 times in a year. But I wonder too, with all of this going on. Okay, the pandemic is serious stuff, but if we didn't have, let's just say that they had just agreed to a new labor deal for this year or last year, and so there's nothing on in the near future. I mean, it's distant horizon, the next deal, and we're not worried about prior or following next year needing a whole new agreement. If we had a new deal in place, would this have been easier? And then the flip side of that is how much of what is going on in the posturing today directly will affect what goes on for the 2022 negotiation?
Well, no doubt about it. Like I mentioned earlier, I think the players have been told by their leadership that it's very important for us to be unified here. We have to hold our ground. We have to do everything it takes in order to eliminate the owners feeling like we're weak, like we are an association doesn't have the ability to stick together during a tough time. Let's face it, none of these players in today's game that are currently wearing uniforms have ever been through a work stoppage. This one is a different work stoppage, but they've never been through a work stoppage as a result of a strike or a result of a lockout. And that was one of the things during my playing career. Every time there was a new basic agreement coming up, you pretty much understood or knew that there was going to be some form of a battle in order to get a collective bargaining agreement hammered out. It may be a short lockout, it may be a short strike, it may be a long strike, but players were essentially prepared for it. And with great leadership with Don Fear and his crew, we were able to maintain that free market environment. Now, I think the owners now are saying, is this group of players as unified as the guys we went to war with in 94, 95, or went to war against in 94, 95 during the strike? I think there's been, a lot of talk about the fact that maybe, since these players have not experienced work stoppages before, maybe we can kind of walk on top of them this time. But, to answer your question, had there already been a basic agreement in place, I think it probably would have made it a lot easier to negotiate a deal for this season.
And they're being tested, and I don't know, and you may not know the answer to it. To me, my recollection of this as an outsider, and when you guys were going through all that stuff in 94, 95, I was just graduating and getting into the business, and so I think I was more fan than journalist, broadcaster, and all that. But what I do remember is that the perception of all the people involved, the bad guy from a fan standpoint, was Don Fear. But
Right.
yet when I talked to people like you guys loved, if I remember, I mean, you guys loved Don Fear or loved what he did for you, and he was a major piece to this puzzle in getting done what needed to get done. One, is that kind of the way you saw him, or how did you guys see him? And two, what's the book on Tony Clark, or is that still to be determined? Because he's the one, and a former player at that, that's leading this union.
Right, and Tony was on our executive committee when I was a player rep as well. So Tony had a lot of tutelage under Don Fear. Now, Don Fear, one of the most intelligent people that I've ever met. And if you would spend 15 minutes talking with Don Fear, you'd walk away from that conversation saying, wow, that level is way above anything that I've ever talked to. He just was brilliant. He's just a brilliant man. But the most important thing that Don had with regards to his abilities was the ability to keep 750 players lined up in the same line and willing to lose significant portions of the season as a result of sticking together, understanding, and with a little background in education, telling players exactly why it was important for them to do what that generation of players did before them, to give them exactly what they have. Now, with regards to Tony, obviously he's never been through a situation like this. Tony Clark is not he's not a trained negotiator. He's a former player who's learned from some of the best, but he's not, with regards to education, nothing like you've seen from previous executive directors of the Major League Baseball Players Association. So I think you'll find out probably after the 2021 basic agreement, how good is Tony Clark at keeping, a lot of players in line and going to war for them. Now, if we go back to last summer, the Players Association, they did hire some really powerful attorneys. They hired some really powerful, experienced people, understanding that they're going to need someone more than just former players leading this group. Tony's a great figurehead, but they also need people with experience, with a legal background, and people who have been through those really bitter collective bargaining negotiations.
I got to think too that this stint, and so let's just say right now, I'll use a term that's not going to be correct, but the players have been locked out now for the better part of 2 months. It's not the right term because no one could control this. This is not,
right.
This is all pandemic related. But the feeling should be the same, right? I mean, it's 2 months. It's going to be at least 3 months. So half of a season of not being at work. And I just wonder what that does to players. And you've pointed this out, and I want you to talk about this. Just because we think guys are loaded and they're making a lot more money than you did back in your day, but we all budget based on what we think we're going to make. It's hard to relate to someone that was going to make $30 million this year, other than to say that if 30 million or whatever it is turns into 10 million, that's a big difference. We'd all love to have those problems. Let's just say that one. But the question is, what does the tolerance level become for guys that have made plans to build a home or do other things? Has this what'll be 3 months away from the game, given them the confidence to be willing to strike or do something regardless of what the pressure is from the outside? Or does it make them say, boy, I don't want to deal with that again?
There are a whole lot more players right now who are saying, I really want to / need to play baseball for more reasons than just playing baseball, but whether it be current economics or planning for your future, financial life. Baseball players' lifespans are very short. I mean, they have to do a lot in a very short period of time to set themselves up by the time their career is over. And there are a whole lot more players that are making closer to the minimum salary than there are making $30 million a year. So even though the average salary in baseball is way up there, it's skewed considerably based on some of those really, the elite, the upper echelon of players. Now, those upper echelon of players, those are the players who have created, the interest and the excitement around which, teams have rewarded them with large contracts, large long-term deals. But there are a lot of players that are working to get that first long-term deal, working to get in a situation where they can become a free agent and hopefully capitalize on that. So there are a lot of players that are, sitting out or being, held out right now. And yes, this is somewhat of a lockout. It wasn't originally based on, a fight between the players and the owners, but now it's really kind of come down to a fight between the players and owners because they can go back to work now. I mean, there's nothing that says they can't go play baseball in empty stadiums, but they have to have an economic agreement in place in order to do that. So, but there are a lot of players, I can promise you, that are just chomping at the bit to get out there and start earning some paychecks so they can work on, paying their bills and building for that, that future that you have such a short period of time to do so.
Right. And again, it's all relative, but if you're suddenly building $1 million house and that was your off-season project and that paycheck starts to come in March, and those are big paychecks, and suddenly they're not there. Look, we all can relate to suddenly not having a paycheck for whatever project or whatever size, whatever we're doing. I mean, we're all in that in some form or another. Again, I always say don't get swayed by the numbers when people say, how could he turn down a $200 million contract and walk away from the team that he's been with forever for $250 or $250 million. Well, I'll give you $50 million worth of reasons why. And, again, I'd love to be in that position. We all would. So this thing looks like it's going to wrap up. My question, before we get some final thoughts here, is if Don Fehr did that so well of keeping everybody on the same page, that has to be one of the toughest jobs. I mean, on the ownership side, you got to keep 30 owners in place, and you have a good commissioner and good leadership, you can do that. By the way, the verdict's still out on Rob Manfred as commissioner too, because while he was in those rooms with you, he's never been commissioner during something like this. And for all of the talk about Bud Selig, there's a lot of things that Bud Selig got done and got them done very well. But so the verdict's still out on him, just like it is Tony Clark. But what happens when you have some of those dissenting voices? And there are going to be some. I mean, you're talking about, as you mentioned, guys at different levels of career and different things at stake and different amounts of money and different stages of life with kids or whatever it is. What happens when you have some of that dissent? And I bring that up in a sense that now it's very easy to raise that dissent through social media and everyone hears about it. I'm thinking about a guy like Trevor Bauer, who was speaking out and very, very opinionated. He has really never been a guy that a whole lot of opponents in baseball like, maybe even teammates, one of the best pitchers. He said he doesn't care. But how much does that torpedo things when you've got a bunch of guys on one page and then others that are saying what they say?
Yeah, I think it's a little different today because, like I mentioned earlier, as a player rep, my job was to kind of take a pulse of the players and be their voice because, again, we didn't have email systems, we didn't have internet, we didn't have the same ability to have the immediacy that we have today. So it's a lot more challenging. It was a lot more challenging then, but I had a responsibility to go to these regional meetings where the team's player reps would go. It might be Chicago, it might be Atlanta, it might be Dallas, wherever they would have these occasional meetings. It would be my job as a player rep to go to those meetings and really not my opinion, but the opinion of my 40-man roster. What are our players thinking? Why is this happening? And there were times that I asked some questions that I had some pretty high profile players, look at me and say, just tell them they have to understand. And I'm like, I have to give them a reason. I can't just tell them that they have to understand. I have to give them a reason why they should understand. And so after some discussion, all these points would be made, and you go back and have your respective conference calls with your team and your players. But information's important. Leadership's extremely important. And I think that's one thing that that Don Fehr did a good job of, is creating an environment where players felt like they had some leadership, and Don obviously was a great leader.
And you have to have a rep on every team that wants to do it and has the capacity. I've seen certain years where at least my impression was like, I don't know if anybody really wants to do it. Well, he'll just do it, like, right? And that's not to say that this generation of players doesn't care, but I would think that there's some teams that have that guy, and other teams it's like, some guys just want to play ball, right? They don't want to think about that end of things. And I mean, you happen to be a guy I think that was probably wired for that.
Well, it was good for me because being a relief pitcher, you've got a lot of time where you're not doing the stuff that like if you were a starting pitcher, or if you're an everyday player, it's a tough job because you're asked to get out of your routine. For me, and my role in the team, as far as my position, it made it easier for me because I didn't have bullpens to throw every third day. I didn't have all the stuff going on in my professional life. It allowed me to do the things where I was circulating information, getting signatures, doing all the things that a player rep was responsible to do at that time. It was a lot easier for me. And most of the stuff you try to do during the off season, as far as the meetings and getting things ready. But there are a lot of things that go on during the course of the season. Probably much less important to have a player rep who has the ability to do all those things nowadays, because everything can be communicated much easier, right from the office in New York. But back then, again, it was you were the mouthpiece. You were the person who had to kind of create opportunities for guys to voice their opinion and relay those opinions and get information in, get information out. So probably a lot more responsibility back then in comparison to today.
All right, a few things as we wind down. Another comment or question from Kiana, who asked, how will the Royals fill this gap of fans missing baseball games across our city and do more community connections, give more opportunities? Monty, it'll be weird, I think, to certainly to have baseball back and early on, most likely no fans in the stands. But I just wonder in this day and age, I mean, the Royals are so charitable, but of course you're going to have to be careful now about face-to-face and in-person events. But with social media, I would think this is a golden opportunity right now for this league, which does not do access as well as other leagues. If you look at the video here in Kansas City from NFL films that everybody's watched over and over again of the Super Bowl and Patrick Mahomes stalking the sidelines and his fiery speeches, I know that was the Super Bowl, but the NFL brings you inside. I think the NBA and NHL do a pretty good job of that too. I would think this is a golden opportunity when they come back to give fans an opportunity to be on the inside if they can't be there in person. Yeah,
there's no doubt about that. I think the players express willingness to be mic'd up and to do some things that are kind of out of the ordinary. It's going to take a collaborative effort on behalf of the players, across the board, to create that excitement. Like I talked about earlier, I mean, baseball's slipping with regards to popularity. They have to find ways to be more like the other sports and be more appealing and attractive to particularly younger fans, and try to get some fans maybe that they would have had otherwise by doing some special things, whether it be in the community, however it might be. They have to do some things to make it work.
Yeah. All right, so the last question is, if I know you're not a big prediction guy, although I generally, there's some days they're usually half a dozen days a year where you're close to guaranteeing a win, which usually I think pretty right. Baseball's hard to guess, but my point to that is that you are not one to make outlandish statements, and I'm generally not too. So we get along really well there. By the way, I should point out, how do you work with a guy for 10 years and you might say otherwise if you do, keep it to yourself. But how do you work with a guy for 10 years and never have a bad day? Like I don't think we've ever had an argument.
No, good. We haven't.
I don't know that most others can say that. It's a testament, by the way, to Monty, because he is one of the lowest maintenance people you can meet. Certainly one of the lowest maintenance athletes, and there are plenty of them out there. I think I'm the higher maintenance one than he is, but we make a good team. So I'll ask you to put your prediction hat on. I'll put you on the spot, which I may or may not do on TV. If you are saying, as I am, that this will be wrapped up in some form or another this week, which also is not a bold prediction because we're getting down to the deadline here, artificial deadline. It's put up or shut up time. What does that deal look like to you? How many games are you guessing, and what does it look like?
I'm going to say half season or 81 games. I'm going to say the players are going to have to give up a little bit with regards to their 100% number that they're stuck on with regards to compensation. And I think they start on July 15th.
Okay, we can deal with that. And I think that they want to go to late in September. The latest I was hearing too is, okay, health, safety, but then also I've seen it put out there that the networks don't want to mess with their playoff schedule too, which nobody mentioned back when they were talking about playing playoffs all through November. We'll see. It's all a negotiation again. All right, Monty, I'm scared to do this, but I did find the video.
Uh-oh.
So we may lose it. Can I just need to do this before we go because I might be fine, but once I hear you laughing, I'll struggle. So I just want to thank JJ's Wine and Spirits. Let's just do this in advance. It's Wine Wednesday, southwest corner of College and Antioch. So check them out. 15% off bottles of wine. Casey Cattle Company, must follow their social media. They got a lot of great updates. Veteran owned and operated. Former U.S. Army Ranger Patrick Montgomery leading the way. It's Wagyu beef, steaks, hot dogs, burgers, brats, you name it. They've got it, and they deliver right down here to Kansas City and all 50 states. And Enterprise Bank and Trust, hashtag no stopping you. I usually don't do that until after my guests are gone. But I think one of the fun things about TV, it's not quite like the shenanigans you guys had in the locker room, but we have a lot of fun, as you guys would in any locker room setting, when we're in commercial breaks. And with our crew, we got a very, very close-knit group. And so what I want to ask, if I could find it, it may not play, actually. Oh, we might have lost it. I was trying to get this up, and it may not be going. I could certainly show pictures of Rex Hudler. That might not be as fun. We might be off the hook, which means I've teased everyone into this thing. I'm going to try one more thing and just see if somehow, some way I can get it to work. It may not be sharing in the way. I've got it in a QuickTime video. So this could be a big disappointment. I'll let you fill in the blanks for 1 second, at least to say how much fun we have when people are not watching. Not that we have fun when they're watching, but there's what's on camera and what's off camera.
Yeah, it depends on whether we're at home or on the road too. We have different types of fun at home than we have on the road because at home we have essentially the same crew, whether it be in our cameras, in the truck and everything. And we have such a great team. And that's one thing that I always, people say, isn't it tough when you're going to the ballpark and your team's in a losing streak? You know what? We have such a great crew, such a great team on our TV crew. I've never gotten my car to go to the ballpark and say, I wish I weren't going to the ballpark today. Regardless if we've won 10 in a row or if we've lost 10 in a row, it's a lot of fun. And the clip that you were going to show is a good example of how much fun we actually do have. So yeah, we do have a lot of fun off camera, and it's just it's not a job for us. So it's I think that's what makes it enjoyable.
Well, I found it, and I found you're actually much better at this stuff than me. I found the security permissions, which I had at one point, but you update these things, and so it is enabling me to do the security permissions right now. But then you have to quit out of something to make it happen. So maybe that is for another day. But either way, I could just say that there was a moment where Rex Hudler was interviewing a dog. And the dog appeared to be very happy to see Rex Hudler, and our producer should have never told us that. But once we knew it, I lost it, and thank goodness we had a commercial break. So I think we spent all 2 minutes of that commercial break in tears.
Yeah, we needed hankies for sure.
Yeah, and that is and I should also point out that the truck is always rolling. So just because we're in a commercial break does not mean that that they're not watching us. So. Wait a minute. I might have it, Monty. You seeing that?
I see it.
Well, there's really no audio to it anyway, but this was actually during the commercial break. And actually, I think this is me taking a shot of what they played in their monitor after they found us. And there's Monty.
I've shown that to some friends, and they laugh so hard just seeing how how hysterical we were.
You remember the kid Brooks Pounders, the pitcher?
Yeah.
Right, and his dad was watching us in California, and if you'll remember correctly, all I had to do was thank HUD and get to a break. Nobody saw the thing. But in the 10 seconds of going to a commercial break to say, stay with us, blah, blah, blah is coming up next, I had to sit there and say that little Sparky, or whatever his name was really excited to see HUD. And that got me through 3 seconds, and I couldn't get through the final 7 as the music was playing. That's when I lost it and tried to say, we'll be back after this. And my voice went to like a octave that hadn't been seen since about 12 years old or 11 years old, maybe. And that's when I remember Brooks Pounder's dad came in the next week. He said, we were watching you from California last week, and something happened to your voice there on that one pregame show. What was going on? And I had to explain to him about good old HUD and little Sparky, or whatever his name was. See? I knew that I knew if you got going that's what would happen, because I've seen it now. How many times have our guys played that for us during a commercial just to mess with us? And I think they know better than to do that now, because we might come back from a segment and not be able to contain ourselves or control ourselves. For the most part, we do it pretty well, but that's one that's always a trigger. I just hope that we are doing those things soon. I don't know where it'll be from, if I'll be in one spot and you'll be in another, or if we'll be in boxes like this. I don't think we'll be sitting right next to each other, but I think I could speak for everyone, including you, to say that we just want baseball back. And it sounds, Monty, like that will be happening very soon.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. All right. Well, it's fun doing this, and I knew that you would have a perspective that is different than many others. I think Whit Merrifield is the Royals rep, if I'm correct on that one. Does that sound right to you?
I think that's right. Yes.
Yeah.
I think Alex Gordon may have some role as well.
That's possible. I know Alex has done it in the past. I thought I'd heard something the other day that Whit was in on whatever meeting. And I know there's different committees and all that kind of stuff too. But appreciate the insight, and hopefully we will see each other in some form or another at the stadium in about a month, or what are we at today, the 10th? Next 4 to 5 weeks. I'm not gonna hold you to July 15th, but it sounds like a possibility.
Yeah, they get something done this week. I mean, they need at least 3 weeks of actual training to get things going. So they were not going to rush anything, especially being protective of the players and their health.
All right, Monty, appreciate you doing it.
Thanks for having me, Joel.
All right, he's Jeff Montgomery, Royals Hall of Famer. I'm Joel Goldberg. Thanks for watching Rounding the Bases Live, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust. See you tomorrow, everyone.